Hey there, and welcome back to my guide series. So, our last guide, the first one in the series, was me covering multi-strike and why it's awesome, but also why it kills you so regularly. And it was pretty well received. I was pretty pleased with the feedback that I was receiving there. So, I decided I would continue on talking about a few more topics that I see people make grievous mistakes with and kill themselves on. That's going to be the focus of the series, more or less, is focusing on topics that people normally don't talk about. I think that there's a lot of videos about the very obvious things that you want to be good at in Monster Train in order to succeed, and there are virtually no videos at all that I can find while doing casual searches that cover the more esoteric topics that every really good player who has very high win streaks is thinking about because they're very important. So, yeah, it's kind of to recap this series. It's aimed at the Covenant 25 win streaking with Divine Victories. We are playing with the DLC enabled here, the last Divinity. And yeah, and so basically, this is me attempting to pass on that quote unquote wisdom to you, my faithful viewer. I will still, regardless of all that, be completely and comprehensively explaining the mechanics that we're addressing for those of you who are just trying to get your wins and learn the game or the DLC. If you find this video as a newer player who just purchased the DLC, I hope that you will still find it useful, and I will be incorporating a lot of explanation aimed at you as well, so that this is very comprehensive, right? So that this isn't just me saying a few things that have no context, would make no sense. This gives you the full context there. So, kind of to continue on previously, as a reminder, leave your comments if you have with any other ideas for other guides you'd like me to make. If there's anything that you want me to over explain like this, and yeah, like the video, subscribe if you want to see more. Because of the positive feedback, I will be making more like this. So, this particular video, as I'm sure you divined, my comedy is impeccable. As you probably divined from the title of the video, is based on Pact Shards. It is a core mechanic in the last Divinity DLC. So when I say core mechanic, I mean it's literally one of the basic fundamental things they added, and it completely warps the game. So in order to talk a little bit more about this, I'm not just going to leave us on the main screen. I am going to open up a run that I've built it to a point where I can show you some things related to it. First of all, you already kind of see them on the screen right here where I'm picking back up my active run, and it explains what it is. Now I'm going to leave this up so that you can briefly read it, but I'll read it as well. The more Pact Shards you collect, the harder the enemies you face will be. Collect 100 before the end of the run to unlock a final battle. Cool. That's not very helpful. The first run of the DLC that you do will attempt to give you a little bit more explanation, but again, it's not very helpful. I see a lot of people make a lot of mistakes with Pact Shards, and there's a lot of reasons why. So let's just open this up. I'm not actually going to play this run. I'm just going to use it to kind of demo what I'm looking at. So I have some random stuff set up. Don't worry too terribly much about this, but the important thing is look up here in the top left. It's right underneath my deck. You see this thing here. So you see it's a fraction out of 100, and the reason it's out of 100 is because it is 100 in order to fight the final boss. But 100 is not the maximum. There is no maximum. There's a theoretical limit based on how you accrue these things and the upper bounds of what you can realistically get. But in practice, I mean, if you want to cheat or edit or mod or whatever, this number can go to whatever you want it to. So the best way to describe Pact Shards, in my opinion, is as an intensity modifier. And that differs slightly from the way the game describes it, because the game describes it as a difficulty modifier. And I don't call it difficulty because it doesn't necessarily make the game harder, it makes the game more intense. And why is that? Well, you accrue these Pact Shards by going to these nodes that have been added with the DLC, okay? Let's see if I can find all the examples. So you have this one. You can if I hover over it, you can see Divine Boons. It gives you money and Pact Shards. So you get a positive benefit out of this, right? That's money you didn't have before the DLC. before you turned it on and before you clicked this. You also could just get an artifact in exchange for 15 shards. And this is a pick one of 3, which is awesome. This is even better than an artifact node in the normal game. You get an additional choice, which means that, there's more things you can see in a run. So you're much more likely, if you click all of these, to see a specific relic, which is important. Worth noting, they did add some new relics to the DLC to help keep it so it wasn't like guaranteed that you find Founding Seal in your incant run, but it is still, even when you factor in the new ones, easier to find a certain relic if you click on everything. And then there's this big one called the Divine Temple. So I'm not going to walk through every single thing in the Divine Temple, but this is kind of a crux of what the Pact Shards are about. If we go into this thing, you get a few choices. The left and right choice are always spell upgrades. The one on the left costs 10. There's a few options. They're usually a little bit less magic power with piercing. You have intrinsic, which means your card will start in your opening hand, and you have the ability to purge a card and make it cost 1 less this way as well. On the right, you have the expensive upgrades. Twin Stone, which gives you Spell Chain. You can see the tooltip for Spell Chain right here. You also have the option to get a Value Stone, which gives it -2 Ember. And you have the option to give it an Extreme Stone, which is +30 magic power. So you can just imagine from what I've only explained there, you get a lot of power in your spells from this, right? And then this center mechanic is a really important part of the DLC. I'm not going to spend too much explaining kind of all the different things that come from this, but this is notionally the ability to put a unit inside of another unit. And I'm going to click this just to show you what the UI looks like. So like in this case, I want to put Molten Encasement inside of my Entombed Explosive. And it's worth noting that you can see what is getting put in up here. Now in these 2 units cases, it's obviously, the card text, because they're tombs, it's how they're designed. But like if you look at Train Steward or something, it's just some random stats. So don't get it in your head that the card text always moves over. It could be something else. And you can click this button over here to see what they all are. So you always have the ability to learn this. Anyway, so I'm just going to show you how this looks. I put Molten Encasement, it blows up. He shows up on the temple. I put him over here. You get some text on this. Awesome. Dude gets added in. You can see on the hover over tooltip over there on the right. It shows me what I'm adding. I upgrade. There's some special effect. Poof. Ta-da! And our man gets the thing. And we paid 25 shards for that. Now, you'll notice this changed color up here. So let me back out of this and let's talk about that a little bit. The game attempts to color code this as a mechanism to be a little bit new player friendly, right? You've got no color, which is essentially no threat. That's what happens when you're at 0, right? So if you're at 0, you have no shard value whatsoever, and everything is just like a normal run at this Covenant level. You have minor threat, which I think it's gray, if memory serves, like a light gray or something, or white or something like that. And that's fine. That's like a little bit of a threat. You've got yellow, you've got orange, and you've got red. And these are fully arbitrary, right? So developers essentially came in and asked the private beta testers for feedback on what kind of made sense here, and they tailored it out so this works out. You'll notice that this is telling me there is extreme threat here, which is red, the highest level, with only 50 out of 100. And that's because it's different at every single ring, right? So like the amount you need to get the extreme threat on ring 1 is much lower than at ring 3, is much lower than at ring 8. So if we go down here to ring 8, if you only have 100 shards, you're actually only at yellow, right? It doesn't consider that very difficult. If you're at like 120, it's going to go orange. And if you're at like 150, it goes, oh boy, and it gives you the red. And this doesn't really mean anything, okay? Don't get too hung up on this. This is just an attempt to help. If you just go randomly clicking on these things, it wants to try to give you a feel for, okay, you probably took a lot. You probably want to be really strong if you're going into this combat, right? Whereas, if it's white or yellow, it's going to be, you don't have to be as strong. Yeah. So don't listen to this too rigidly. Just kind of use it as a guideline. And once you're really good at the game, you don't even need this color anymore. It's just kind of like a UI element that changes. It's more for the new users. So yeah, the important thing about Pact Shards is that it changes the way you think about the game. So before the DLC, I would say that you really need to answer 3 questions. You need to answer your boss strategy, so your relentless plan. Essentially, how are you killing the big bad guy at the end of the run, at the end of the combat, right? So this could be a floating boss or it could be a non-floating boss. You need to be solving 4,000 damage Seraph, basically, because that's how much HP he has. So that is your pre-DLC. First one. The second one, you need to solve backline. Backline being those flimsy dudes that go up to 10 HP in the pre-DLC. Those would be the purifiers. And you need to kill them so they don't kill you. They usually have more impactful attack stats, like 15 times 2 or something like that. In the case of Shade Wings, they might spawn curses. In the case of purifiers, generally really problematic. You want to kill them. So you wouldn't be focusing on dealing with them somehow. That's like the backline solution. And then the other question you need to kind of answer in the non-DLC world is, how do you handle 2 really thick units in the front of a room, right? Because it's those thick units that if you don't answer the second one, you're probably going to lose because you're going to leak and they're going to do like 50 damage to you every round until you die, basically. And they will kill you before you even have to deal with the boss. And generally speaking, if you answer those 3 questions pretty well, the boss plan, the backline, and the double heavy, then you're probably going to win. And, you can solve those in lots of different ways. But I describe that solution to the base game because I want to emphasize how it's changed with the DLC, right? Because there's a new fight in the DLC. If you get down here, you maybe saw it in the tooltip for the shards themselves. If you beat Seraph the patient, right? You beat Seraph the patient here, you attempt to go relight the pyre and win, you get intercepted here by a new final boss if you have over 100. And because we're talking about the Covenant 25 win streak with Divine Victory, that means you need to beat this optional final boss, right? This guy, he adds a new set of questions to answer, and the solutions that you have to the other problems don't necessarily work anymore because his wave composition includes sometimes 4 heavies, usually around 600 damage spread across 4 to 5 units on a floor, which is a lot of HP and a lot of units. And most of the backlines, quote unquote, have upwards of 25 HP, which makes them more of like standard units as opposed to flimsy dudes that you throw 10 damage at and kill. So it's very difficult. It's also important to note that there are mini bosses in this on waves 4 and 6 that represent somewhere between 600 and 900 HP, and it goes up with the number of shards you have, right? So if you decide to enter the final boss at like 120 shards, they come in significantly stronger than at 100, and it goes up from there. They also have scaling status effects and some other things. The other important thing is that throughout this run, the more shards I have, the reason it's talking about threat level is because the random units here in these combats get upgraded to stronger versions, right? And the bosses themselves get stronger too. They get their own status effects. Things get tougher. So it's an intensity modifier, as I described initially. You get stronger upgrades. I now have a combined unit that I could put Endless in and get both effects, right? Which is awesome. So I'm getting stronger, but the enemies are getting stronger too. And because of the way the enemies get stronger, you're going to be thinking about the solutions to your run differently. You're going to be answering early game, you're going to be answering the mid game, and you're going to be answering the end game, including the new boss, right? The Divinity. So it's not as easy to kind of codify a run into 3 questions anymore. And that complexity is refreshing. frankly, I think it's been very good. It's an awesome DLC if you haven't bought it, by the way. You know, if you're watching this video and you're like, geez, I don't know about the DLC, let me strongly recommend it because it adds intensity and it adds complexity without adding too much difficulty to understand, right? You just like, oh, I just take some things, I get a number, I get strong, I kill bad guys, and there's more bad guys. It's cool because if you want to get good at these win streaks and hit big numbers, then you're going to want to learn the new mechanics, right? It's going to be really important if you want to fill out the new logbook too, obviously, because you got to do that with all crowns at 25 Covenant. So that's notionally how Pact Shards interact with the game and what all it changes. I'm not going into every single detail. You know, I want to mention at least briefly that you can see the full list of infusions in the logbook by just toggle unit essences here. Just click this and voila, you see everything. They all have their own thing, obviously not champions, and it adds a lot of interesting stuff, right? Some units that were not very good in the base game are now really awesome, and vice versa, because there's just different things to answer now. So yeah, that's notionally what Pact Shards are. So I did briefly mention the elite enemies. I want to also point out that there's a table of them on the Wikipedia page, which I will be the wiki page for Monster Train, which some folks on the Monster Train Discord help maintain. That's really nice. I actually think they've done a good job with it. It's informative, even if, you know, a little cluttered because there's a lot of information. So if you want to know what those the enemy unit upgrades are that you get for this, I will put a link in the description of this video and you'll be able to click that. So go ahead and find that and navigate to that page and get your learn on. The other thing I want to talk about with those elite units is how exactly they get upgraded, right? Because it's not obvious, and the game doesn't explain this because it's confusing. If you are new to the DLC and you just play with a bunch of different Pact Shard levels on different combats, it's gonna look very random to you. You're just going to be like, oh, enemies just randomly get upgraded. But there is an algorithm in play, and while there is some randomness involved, the algorithm attempts to spread out the elites so that they don't bunch up in certain waves and just demolish you, right? Because you imagine if units all get upgraded in one wave, that wave is just intensely difficult compared to other waves. And obviously there would be some exceptions because different units are upgraded at different levels, and sometimes you just do get overloaded waves. It is a possibility based on the randomness. So basically, some things to think about. First, let me tell you which units get upgraded, right? If you have an invasion trial, right? So if you take a trial and it says spawn some clergymen, they are never upgraded. So you don't have to worry about that. And also, units that are spawned by floating bosses do not get upgraded. And that really only matters for our friend Seraph, right? Seraph spawns light wings and they never get upgraded, right? Your light wings never get upgraded. It's worth noting that the HP on her little statues do go up, and Daedalus. Oh, how convenient. This run has both of them. Daedalus's bombs get a little more HP. Those are exceptions to that. The light wings never get upgraded. They also, you'll notice a unit is upgraded because it has like some purpley effects on it, right? None of those units that I just talked about that get spawned have purpley effects, even if their HP goes up because the quote-unquote boss difficulty has increased. So that's just kind of important. Those like Fell's statues and Daedalus's bombs are part of the quote-unquote shard enhancements that those bosses get. And so for the actual algorithm itself, how this works is the game rotates through the waves and attempts to upgrade something per wave. And every unit has a different cost associated with it. So if you imagine I have 50 shards, right? That means basically as the game rotates through the waves, it will say, I will upgrade this unit, and it has a cost of, let's say, 10 shards, right? And then that's great. Okay, cool. That means I have 40 shards left, and it will then try to upgrade something on the next wave for 40 shards. And if it gets something cool, it'll upgrade on something on the next wave, and it keeps going until it runs out of shards, right? So you can imagine that this can run into some situations where you get to one of the later waves, it doesn't have enough shards to upgrade anything, and then it cycles back to the earlier waves, and maybe those do have something that can be upgraded. So you can get early waves that stack up, whereas, even though it tries not to do that, sometimes you will have that happen. There are a few waves that I will point out on some random combats where you have to watch out for the way that behaves, because you can get got by it, and you want to be planning around that challenge. So yeah. Now that I've notionally explained the algorithm, though, I want to talk about some important shard thresholds that you should be watching out for. If you watch my Train of Thought series, and also the modded series, but a little less so in that because I'm much more casual in the modded series. With my Train of Thought series, I'm trying to play it at a level that is winning every single run. I want to put out obviously I'm not playing on my win streak because it's a constructed series, but at the same time, I want to play as if it was, right? I want to make sure I'm putting in the effort to win. So you'll hear me talk about, oh, I have 50 shards. This means something coming up. And it may be something I need to watch out for. I need to make sure I have an answer to it before I click to get 50 shards, because I risk killing myself, right? So I'm going to go over next important Pact Shard thresholds. And this is going to be a large part of this video because I think this is the part that people don't think about and don't have either memorized or on a reference sheet somewhere. Because if they're not thinking about this, you just click shards when it makes sense, when you think you're getting value, and you can kill yourself and you will end your streak because you didn't anticipate an upgrade or a challenge that comes at a certain threshold of shards, and it will destroy you. So yeah, let's start at the beginning. I'll attempt to kind of do this based on ring so you understand. I've explained this a few times in my Train of Thought video. I've had some people message me going, whoa, I didn't know that. And that's kind of what spurred on this whole guide in the first place, is that this Divine Boons versus the only other option that can spawn here in Ring 1, which is the Divine Horde. So you actually see it in Ring 2, it's this thing. But you can get one or the other here. And it's important because one is 10 Pact Shards and one is 15. And if you take 15 Pact Shards, right? If you hit 15 in rings 1 through 3, that means a Disciple Footsoldier gets upgraded. That's one of those 5-1 backline guys. He becomes a 9x2, so it has 9 attack with multi-strike 1 and 5 HP. And if you're sitting here at a pretty little 40 HP because of the Covenant rank, that thing, if you leak it, will do basically half of your HP immediately, and it can just kill you outright if you're not good at it. So if you have a really bad backline solution or like no answer whatsoever, so like you see here, I have an answer, right? I can, reap, I can do some things. In this case, I have hosting kin, I've answered this problem, I have revenge. I've answered this problem in my run, but you might have a start that can't answer that problem. And if that's the case, you should not take a Divine Horde here because it will probably kill you. Unless, there's always the high roll opportunity, right? Oh, geez, I hit 2 times Incant or 2 times Extinguish on ring 1 and just win the game. Fine, okay, it can happen. But you could also get trash in a relic pick here. You get like, I don't know, Cleansing Water. It's fine, but it's not going to save you from a 20 damage backline that you can't kill otherwise. So always be watchful of when you go above 15 shards in the first 3 rings. Make sure you can answer that 5 HP backline and not die. The next threshold in the first 3 rings is at 25 Pact Shards. Okay? Now, 25 Pact Shards, those heavies that have 45 HP and do 2 damage, the Forged Disciples, become upgraded to a Sweeper that deals 4 damage on sweep. I only mention this one because there are some paths in the game. Let's just pull up the logbook and look at Tethys, because I'm looking at you, girl. There are some paths and some situations and some units that will just die to this sweeper. And if you're not anticipating it or you don't have a way to keep your unit, it's really important, alive. So another good example here is like, we go over here to units in Awoken. If you have an Animus of Will with base HP, or like an Animus of Speed or something, you can just die, right? Your backline gets slapped and just explodes. And that's really, really bad. It's also important to note how this interacts with the Ring 3 boss, because you could get Rage Talos rather, right? And if you get Rage Talos, then that thing can come in with Rage, and it will do additional damage that you might not be expecting. So just be mindful that you don't let yourself get got when you go over 25 shards in the first 3 rings. And really, those are kind of the only 2 thresholds that matter for the early game. Now we're going to jump to the mid game. I always think about Ring 4 because of one boss. Party Boy, our friend Pyrelight Master. You know, he raises his hands to the roof, guy has wings, looks like a real rock star. That guy picks up multi-strike 1 at 50 Pact Shards. Okay, so in this run right here, I have 50 Pact Shards. I'm going to go, oh no, I need to be able to answer this. And let's say I have a top floor setup. You know, that dude gets resolve and he gains attack. He becomes like a 16 times 2. 32 damage per round from the boss on Ring 4 can be devastating. You need to make sure your Relentless plan is real solid going into Ring 4 if you hit 50. If you're under 50, you're fine. He only attacks once. You should not worry about him at all, frankly. The other bosses don't really matter here. They don't do anything fancy. So always watch the 50. It's an important threshold going into Ring 4. The next one I want to call attention to is Crystalcloak on Ring 5. Always respect Crystalcloak. She is the mind killer. And there's a reason for that. Because Crystalcloak is, even without shards, a potential run killer. Because if you're not ready for her, if you can't get rid of her stealth or otherwise manipulate her and delay her, then she will just kind of run your tank down and kill you and win. And basically you will lose. I think that of all the Ring 5 bosses, you know, Self-Made Heartbeat, always scary. You know, the sweep dude is really spooky. Like, it's a tough ring in general, but there's no threshold that's going to change how terrifying Self-Made Heartbeat is. You know, Self-Made Heartbeat just gets harder and does more damage at higher shards. So hopefully you got stronger too, right? Whereas the Crystalcloak, gaining like additional stacks of stealth and knowing when she gains additional stealth is important, because you want to make sure you have enough turns to delay. You'll see me do things like always keep 2 train stewards in and always make sure I'm answering survivability and thinking about Crystalcloak in every run at Ring 5. And that's important. So just some statistics, because she's not obvious. I think the real number to be terrified of here with Crystalcloak is 80 Pact Shards, right? Because she gains an addition. She starts with 8 stealth, okay? So always 8 rounds. If you're setting up top floor, you're basically dealing with 6 rounds because she loses 2 while she ascends. Cool, so 6 rounds. She, at like shardless, I think she's doing something like 16 damage. I think it's like 14, but she might have a sycophant or something, so 16 or whatever. You know, you can kind of run the math and be like, how much HP do I need in order to not die, right? And that's fine. But the next question is, every 40 Pact Shards, she gains an additional stack of stealth, okay? So if you hit 80, you're almost always going to have 40 at this point. It's pretty rare you don't. So you kind of just accept 9, which means that you have 7 turns to deal with. But at 80 Pact Shards, she picks up that 10th stack of stealth, and you now have 8 rounds you have to manage. And that's a lot of extra HP. So if you have 80 or also, you know, 40 walking into Ring 5, be thinking about how you're answering those extra turns. There's a lot of solutions for this, right? Like in this run, I'm almost certainly just going to play this in Molten Encasement Infusion a bunch of times, and this thing can just buy me all those 8 rounds. I don't really care, no big deal. Or like, you could have Damage Shield that just buys those rounds. You could have a lot of things, just a ton of HP. You have a lot of choices. Regen, another good one. There's a lot of ways of doing imps, right? Just throw imps on the floor. So yeah, so that's important. The next one I want to talk about is Fel. And only a specific path of Fel. So like not this one. This is Spell Shield Fel, so we don't really care that much. But if you get Rage Fel, so Rage Fel gains multi-strike every 50 Pact Shards. And if you know, she starts with multi-strike 1. So Rage Fel has a damage scaling number that is unrivaled. based on Pact Shards, right? So if you go to 100 Pact Shards by Rage Fell, you need to be so bloody confident, especially because if those elites get upgraded to like really powerful sweepers and then also get Rage, you could just get run down by a dude with 160 HP doing like 24 back sweeping damage to your floor. And it's terrifying. Rage Fell is a nightmare, and you always need to respect her when you have it. So be mindful of the 50 Pact Shard thresholds here. You need to be extremely strong if you are going to walk in to Rage Fell at 100 Pact Shards. You just gotta slap, and I'm talking like an absolutely broken run that cannot lose. Kind of, it's very tough. You just can't disrespect her. You need to always pay her the respect she deserves. So, I think yeah, that's all of the mid-game thresholds I really want to talk about. You know, in this case, we're talking more about the bosses. There's less spooky things that really go into the actual units themselves here. You know, they're going to get upgraded because you're taking shards, and it's kind of random. You could get any of them. It's not like crossing a certain threshold somehow enables them, right? So now let's talk about the late game, okay? And there's a lot to say here. The first one is going to be at Ring 7. There's one combat in particular I want to draw attention to. It's Winged Conduits, okay? Winged Conduits, in case you don't recognize it, is the combat that has the conduits in the back line that give the whole floor multi-strike. And because of the lack of diversity in the floors on this combat, it's actually statistically pretty likely that you're going to get multiple units upgraded in multiple waves. And because of the way Pact Shards are spent, if you're sitting at somewhere between 80 and 100 Pact Shards, so, you know, average of 90, then it's actually pretty statistically possible, like likely, frankly, that the first wave gets a double heavy upgrade. Now, if you remember that first wave, this is, you know, you imagine I've played this game an obnoxious amount of time, so I have a lot of these combats memorized and I know exactly what to worry about. You probably don't. You should be thinking about that first wave. You should have it memorized in this combat because it is a Steel Wings in front of a Gilded Wing in front of a Winged Conduit. And it's very likely, frankly, that you get the Steel Wings and the Gilded Wing upgraded together on Wave 1. That is a 230 HP frontline tank with spikes. I think it's spikes, what is it, spikes 5? Jeez, maybe it's 3. I can't remember the exact number. It has spikes, okay? Just be mindful of that. And a 290 HP Gilded Wing that starts with Rage 2. And then, you know, by the way, this thing has a conduit in the back line that will give it multi-strike. That is an obscene amount of HP to be answering on Wave 1. If you're going to set up bottom floor, you better damn confident. If you're going to set up top floor, you have 3 turns to ramp to the point of defeating that wave. And just think of the numbers there. 290 HP doing 10 damage around if you leak the whole wave, right? Let's say you kill the conduit, right? You can do 5 damage to the back, or 10 damage to the back, it's fine. And cool. All right, so whatever, you do that. This thing goes up 290 HP for 10 damage. That is, let's see, if your pyre is just doing a straight 40, then that is 8 turns. 8 turns. It hits you for 80 damage, plus any of the spikes damage from the Steel Wings that leaks. That is insane. That can just kill you from 80 life if you leak that at that point. So yeah, you need to be given that some respect. And there's no hard and fast rule for Wing 7 Wing Conduits. Generally, you just need to be confident. Like if you're going to take this trial, right, you'll hear me talk about this. You'll be like, okay, I have Winged Conduits. Okay, I want this trial. I feel strong. Can I answer 520 damage on Wave 1? And if not, if it kills me to make that risk, then I'll probably skip it unless I absolutely have to in order to win. So yeah. The next one that I'll call out, you know, the shard threshold that really matters here, 100. You see it on the UI element, right? You need 100 in order to get your Divine Victory. So make sure you get 100. And I will briefly note that, we'll talk about strategies for when to look at shards and when to collect shards and things after I get through these thresholds. But you'll hear me talk about, okay, where are my shards coming from on a run a lot. So make sure you get over 100. It's important if you want to have a Divine Victory. It feels bad when you just kind of you get here and you're like, I need 20, and then you find out you have a horde and you have nothing you could dupe, and you're like, oh no, I can't fight the Divinity on this combat. And in my opinion, from a win streaking perspective with Divine Victories, I consider that a loss. I basically just end the run, right? Because I don't want to win because it messes up the win streak because it looks wrong, and it is wrong. So get 100. It's important. And now we're going to talk a little bit about Seraph, because Seraph is tricky and gets a lot of unique augmentations based on Pact Shards. Obviously, if you walk in at like 100, 105, whatever, Seraph is as Seraph does. You get what you expect, right? The dude has all of the basic shard enhancements, nothing too crazy. But there are specific additional thresholds where Seraph gets even scarier, and I want to point them out. The first one is for Seraph the Patient, which happens to be the first one that we have here. Seraph the Patient gains Trample at 130 Pact Shards. So if you're going that high, you need to be confident. But you'll see that I normally sit around 100 to 110 because I respect Seraph a lot. And Seraph is usually, quite frankly, in a lot of cases, harder than the Divinity, because the Divinity asks you to answer waves, very difficult waves. Usually if you can get to Relentless on the Divinity, you're probably in a good place, you're probably going to win. But Seraph has a much scarier Relentless combat, so you need to have a really good boss solution. Seraph also has much more focused waves, and you can sometimes get scary things like upgraded Gilded Wings, much more common, whereas Divinity's more diversified. And because of that, you need to just be watching Seraph a lot. So 130, Patient gets Trample. The next one I want to talk about is Seraph the Chaste, because everyone always is annoyed about how the Divinity has this ability called Purify, which removes damaging status effects after they do damage. Well, really it just means it removes Frostbite and Reap at the end of turn. So yeah, let's say, look at this run, okay? This run has Reap, this run has, where is he? This run has Inspire Spine Chief, which is doing Reap. A big part of how I'm going to kill Seraph on this run, for example, if I were going to play it out, is by applying a ton of Reap to him out of Relentless, and then just blowing him up by like doing 1,000 damage to him a turn as he ascends the floors. If I had Seraph the Chaste here, and if I went to 140 Pact Shards, Seraph the Chaste gets Purify, and would just demolish that strategy. It's important to know that if you're going to go in on these damaging status conditions, you need to respect Chaste and his ability to gain Purify so that you don't get yourself killed by that. Cool. The other important one, at least in my opinion, is that Seraph the Temperate, so Sap Seraph, the next one we're going to talk about, he gains additional multi-strike. And so the important thing is that you know that Seraph normally only has multi-strike 2, right? But he gains an additional stack of multi-strike at 100, so you're dealing with a ×4 buddy. He also gains an additional stack at 150 Pact Shards, so you need to be prepared if you go to 150 to face a ×5 Seraph the Temperate here. He does a lot of damage. He does a lot of damage when you do that, so be careful about that, okay? That's an important one. And then Diligent. So Diligent is weird, all right? Diligent gains Stealth with Pact Shards, and that can be spooky. The important thing is that Seraph has 8 waves, after which he rises through the floors on turns 9 through 11 in the combat, right? He gains 1 stack of stealth every 30 shards, and another stack of stealth every 35 shards due to, where is it, the Covenant, I believe it's Covenant 10 boss power increases per Pact Shard. Yeah. So Covenant 10 plus, you're going to start seeing that additional stack of stealth every 35 shards. These count independently of one another, and they stack additively. So he ends up with a lot of with a lot of stealth. And there are some. I'm not going to ask you to do the math and run those numbers. There's just some kind of important thresholds that I want you to be thinking about. And the first is at 140 Pact Shards, he will lose stealth when he enters Relentless. That means that he has 8 rounds of stealth. So you can't really hit him very easily out of Relentless, but you could set up bottom floor and still be okay. At 150 Pact Shards, his stealth will wear off 1 turn after he enters Relentless. At 175 Pact Shards, his stealth wears off 2 turns after Relentless. And then at 180 Pact Shards, if you go that high, his stealth wears off 3 turns after he enters Relentless, which means that it will wear out when he gets the top floor on a top floor setup. Important. So when I say 3 turns after, he actually technically gets 1 round on you in Relentless if you're a top floor. So just be mindful of that. It can be very scary, and if you have an all-in, like hyper-aggressive offensive plan here, you stack up to an insane number of shards. Normally this only happens with like expert challenges or like the daily or something, but you can get numbers on Diligent that just don't disrespect him. He will just demolish you. He will just put you down with his big attack numbers. He's doing like 48 damage or something, depending on your Pact Shard level. And just 48 damage times like however many rounds of stealth he has can just be crippling. You obviously know you can remove that buff by a lot of means, by like dazing him or, stealthing yourself or resin removal or something. You have options, but just be careful of Diligent. And okay, the next 2 are specifically for the Divinity I want to talk about. So first of all, 150 Pact Shards opens up 2 post-Seraph events that are very strong. And sometimes if you're running a build that is strong enough to go to like 140 or something, jumping to 150 is not a big jump, right? Because you're already at 140, your Seraph is probably hyper upgraded at this point. So 150 is not a big jump, unless you're getting, Temperant and you have Sap Seraph with the multi-strike or whatever. But you might as well go to 150 if you can, because these 2 events are great. The first event you can get is called a Shard of Divinity, which, let's see if I can actually pull these up. I think I might be able to. Yeah, cool. So I haven't seen blank pages on this profile. That's funny. So Shard of Divinity is this thing. It basically just gives your Pyre 100 armor. This is like Pyre Wall on steroids. You can leak so much, and it feels good, and it's fine, right? The next one, blank pages. I don't know how I don't have it unlocked on this profile. That's funny. You can tell I don't go to 150 Pact Shards very often. But basically, it gives you a random champion at rank 3. It adds a random champion at rank 3 to your hand every turn, where you don't start with a champion. So basically not turn 1 and not on redraws if you just leave champions in. You can get some crazy value out of this. We're talking like rank 3 Brawler Prince behind cultivating rank 3 Sentient, and that's just a floor that you get for free on top of whatever the hell your run is already doing. Blank pages is pretty whack. Both of these relics, if you see them, you take them because they add a ton of value. They help you on the Divinity. And this is the only threshold here where I'm going to tell you, if you're already around 140, find a way to take 10 more, because you have a statistically significant chance of seeing those events. It's not guaranteed. It works out to like a little over, I think it's 40% or so ish. Check the wiki, right? The wiki has this information, but I think it's around 40%. And to have the 4 in 10 chance of just rolling into one of those like huge value relics, that's pretty good. That's usually worth it if you can support it. So keep that in mind. The last one I'm going to be talking about, the last threshold, is for our Divinity himself. And I'm going to mention it because I'm talking about his attack numbers on this combat. So it's not easy for me to preview this here without actually being in the combat, but the Divinity is a fight fought across 3 floors. He is a floating boss that is always present on all 3 floors. At the top floor, he has Sweep. On the mid floor, he has Multi-Strike 1, so he attacks twice. And on the bottom floor, he has Trample. The main thresholds I'm going to be bringing up here are mid floor, top floor, because that's usually what you're doing, and the bottom floor, frankly, it's not very strong. The enemy is not very strong on the bottom floor. That's basically, if you can set up bottom floor Divinity, you're really strong, you ramp really fast. It's kind of like the reward is that, the boss is not very threatening on that floor. That's your reward for being able to do it, more or less. So on top floor, at 100 Pact Shards, the Divinity strikes for 9 damage with Sweep. 9 damage is an important threshold for a lot of reasons. I'm going to go back to Tethys. Let's look at rank 3. Conduit dies in 1 turn, no matter what, at any level of Pact Shards on the Divinity top floor. So you got to answer that. Alright, so Handheld Totem obviously lives. That's fine. There are a few other things that matter here. You just gotta be answering the question of how many turns can my backline damage solution survive before I draw whatever my solution is. Daze, sap, I don't know, big healing. Maybe you put HP on it and you're healing the floor, or, lifesteal. There's a lot of things. It could be a lot of things you answer it with. But you just need to be counting that number. So at 100, he's doing 9. If you go to 105, he's doing 10. That is a jump right there at 105. So just remember that. 105, you get that 10 attack sweep. At 100, the mid floor is doing 7 by 2. Okay, so it has 7 damage and it gains multi-strike 1, so it's doing 14. At 110 Pact Shards, it goes up to 8 by 2. Okay, and generally speaking, the top floor, mid floor damage bonus, they oscillate, right? You're gonna get either attack bonus or a mid floor bonus. Again, the wiki has these exact numbers. I'm not gonna put the formulas in here. The important thresholds are around that 100 mark, because if you're going way higher than 100, you're already strong enough. You don't really care about this anymore, right? And it's also worth noting that at 120 Pact Shards is kind of when additional modifiers kick in, and that's when the Divinity's doing even more damage on all floors. So be careful if you go to 120 or higher, right? Because the Divinity, kind of all bets are off. You're going to want to check the wiki if you want to get the exact number. He could do a truckload to you and maybe just put you down if you're not planning for it. So yeah, oof. That's a lot of discussion, and that is essentially the crux of what I kind of want to share there is Pact Shard thresholds that you should be thinking about in order to not die horribly on your combats. So that's a good one. The next thing I want to hit on, and this is fortunately a shorter planned section here, is that I think there are a couple common mistakes. It's pretty easy to think you can and should take value whenever you can, right? A lot of people will be like, yo, I have a really good infusion. Let me just bust it out here, right? And you got to be careful, right? You don't want to get yourself killed. You need to be able to weigh and value how strong you actually are. If you have like this temple here and this temple here, answer the question, did I need to do this infusion here in order to win? This doesn't have endless right now, right? So like, why did I do this thing, right? I only get to play it once, maybe a few more times if I reform it, but it doesn't add a ton of value here, right? It's actually better to keep them separate. So I would, in a real run, not have done that upgrade. I only did it here to showcase the mechanic to you. I would have done it here. And because there's really the only punishment here for doing it later is that I don't have that power for Daedalus. But do I need it? If it's like an upgrade into your unit, like if I had, I don't know, like Hot Shark or Titan Sentry to put inside of my Glugsider, or the other way around, or something like that, I could see immediate big power here. And so it might be worth it to do it right away, because I could take, a trial or just survive this better with the extra power. Sure, if you gain that value and it's worth it, then go for it. But in this case, I put myself in a big risky situation. I'm now fighting a much harder Daedalus. I fight harder enemies, I fight a higher HP Daedalus, he does more damage, his bombs have more life. I could just die, and that would be bad. Whereas putting it here, it's safer. So be careful about that. It's easy to think, you can take the value as soon as you can. Don't. Plan it out. Make sure you're thinking about it. And then the other common mistake I see, and I mentioned this briefly, make sure you hit 100 Pact Shards by Divinity. All right. Like I said, I consider this a loss. I've seen too many people on streams and things go like, haha, let me just click things and do great. And they get to like ring 5 and they go, oh yeah, let me look ahead and make sure I can get enough Pact Shards. And then everything is like divine boons, right? And they're like, oh, I only get 30 and I just lose. I can only get like 90. And don't let that happen to you. Always look ahead. Make sure you're knowing early kind of when you're going to get Pact Shards. I like at ring 1 thinking about, okay, is there a temple in the next few? Where's my first temple that I care about? And make sure I understand kind of like where my initial 25 is coming from, more or less, like 20 to 40 or something like that. And then once I kill the ring 3 floating boss, that's when I look at the map and I go, all right, where the heck am I getting all the rest of my shards? And I use that to plan out my entire run, basically. I'm thinking ahead from ring 4, basically. So, there are some exceptions, obviously. Maybe you notice that you only have like 2 temples in your run because RNG hates you. You might need to take those temples when you see them and do what you gotta do. So, just be looking. Don't get yourself trapped. Don't mess up. You want to make sure you're getting value out of your shards, right? Like something strong, and you want to make sure it's value add throughout the entire run. And it's not one and done. Like doing this here is a big risk because I don't have endless. If I had endless on this thing, I would feel a lot better about this because I'd be playing it every turn, right? So, yeah. Anyway, those are probably the 2 common pitfalls that I really see people make mistakes on at Covenant 25 when win streaking that get themselves screwed up. And, let me jump from what I was just saying, those common mistakes, and talk a little bit about shard planning. I think there are 3 generally viable strategies for this, and it changes a little bit based on your run and based on the layout of your Pact Shards, right? Like are both your temples for the entire run and no other temples, all of them like ring 2 and 3? Well, you need to make sure you can use them ASAP, right? Because you want to get that value. So that's potentially the first type, which is front-loaded. Front-loaded shard strategies are the riskiest because these strategies rely on you getting really strong out of the gate and put you at a lot of risk in the early rings, and then they just kind of gradually balance out in difficulty later on. We're talking things like 70 shards going into ring 4, just completely disrespecting like the ring 4 boss. Like, you better answer, Pyrelight Master, and not die to Party Boy here. You better be able to do like 800 damage to your Talos or something, because it's gonna be strong and it's gonna hurt. These strategies are usually born out of necessity. Like, you don't have the choice. You have to take the temples early in order to get the value, in order to win. Or maybe you are like an in-camp build and you hit Founding Seal as your starting relic, and you have a Siren of the Sea in ring 2 with multi-strike and incant armor 2. You are now crazy strong, and you can just disrespect stuff. Just take value when you see it. You don't have to be like, oh geez, do I take it now or do I wait to try to see it later? Like, if you see a plus 30 here and you're like, geez, I need a plus 30, well, hell, grab your plus 30. Like, you're strong enough, you can do it. So be able to evaluate your strength early on very accurately and know those shard thresholds I talked about before. Respect them and then disrespect them appropriately, right? Because you're strong enough that you don't care anymore. That is an important kind of discussion point. Most of the time, what you see people do is the next type of strategy, which is the balanced strategy. The balanced strategy is you take a little bit of stuff here, you maybe turn down a few things, it's fine. You go in here, you're like, I don't need the spell chain. Like, I would take it, sure, like maybe it's really good into something I have. Like, I don't know, maybe I wanted to be like, haha, it's a strong here or something. Maybe you'll see it again later. You don't need it to win. So I can look for something in my 15 shards elsewhere, right? This is basically like you're cruising around at like 10 or 15 here. You've got like 10 or 15 here, unless you needed this. You've got like maybe 25 to 40 here, probably more like 40. You chill it around 40, so you're respecting Pyrelight Master. Basically, the balance strategy is respect all the thresholds I put out, right? You're basically looking at it and you're going, let me just stay under all of them, just barely, right? So you're like, you're under 50 here, you're under 80 here, you're under 100 here, you know, you're watching yourself, you're like at 90-ish or something at most here, and then you're going to basically walk into Seraph at exactly 100. This is a very balanced strategy. It's pretty common. It's what I do the most, I think. And yeah, usually I don't have to disrespect the game. Usually I'm not so strong early that I need to or should. And yeah, it's pretty workable. I think it's fine. It's worth noting, you can duplicate cards that have shards in them, and you get value. If you duplicate an infused unit, it's 15 shards. If you duplicate if you duplicate a spell that has one of these upgrades, every one of the left side upgrades is 5 shards in the dupe. Every one of the right side upgrades is 10 shards in the dupe, and they add up. So if I had both of these in one spell and then duped it, it would be plus 15. So you can also just like, you know, play it chill and do the next strategy, which is backloaded shard strategies. This means you feel really weak in the beginning. This is like your, I don't know, you missed Conduit Tethys, right? And you have to play spell weakness Tethys. You just feel horribly weak here, right? You're going like 10 shards through ring 4, and you're going to be like, all right, I'm going to do a ring 7 infusion. I'm going to buy both of the things, take 45, and I'm going to dupe something for 15 right here. Like, it's like 60 shards at ring 7. It's very backloaded. It's like, let's just survive while we're weak, try to find value where we can, and then just blow it up later on in the run. This is common for me with weak champions, or champions I don't value very highly, or bad rolls. You know, like with Conduit Tethys, you're pretty middle of the road, you're pretty good, but like if you hit the Chillwind handheld totem start, oh boy, it's tough. The other example might be like, I don't know, you get the Wrathful Reaper Prince start, and you're just not very good with either of them in that combat. Like, you just have a bad start for them, right? This can be really scary. Play it cool. You don't have to go hard. You know, just take very few shards in the beginning of the run. You know, maybe you're a Penumbra and you just have to take like something stupid because, I don't know, you're just struggling. I don't know. There's a lot of kind of situations and it's hard to theory craft them all, but basically there's chances where you just feel really weak early on and you need to be evaluating that and then decide to play cool. So obviously the most important thing about all of these is to be able to understand your strength. Know how strong you are. That is something that comes with experience, with time. You're gonna mess that up a lot. You're gonna be like, I'm strong, and then you get run over by, you know, Pyrelight Master. I guess I wasn't that strong. You're like, I'm strong, and then you get blown away by Rage Fell. And, you know, it happens. You're gonna lose a lot while jumping from non-DLC to DLC, and that's okay. It's a learning period, right? You just need to get familiar with it, and then once you are familiar with it, then you can kind of know how to approach these things. So that's essentially all I'm going to say on this, our lovely guide. I've talked a lot here, but I think it was all really important. Definitely longer than my first video, but I think there's a lot of information here, and this will also be a useful guide for new players to the DLC. So hopefully you find that helpful. There's a lot of stuff here, kind of like the shard strategies. I think the biggest part of this whole thing is the understanding the thresholds. That is a very high level play kind of understanding, right? Knowing what numbers you need to be thinking about. That is, when you're at that level, that's when you're considering the win streaks, right? That's when you're considering, how do I get to like 75 wins in a row without resetting combats and stuff. That is the important mental thought process to have. And then you're considering your shard strategies based on that and how strong you are. Understanding your strength is really important. And then, you know, obviously understanding the algorithm plays into that as well. You know, you have that ring 7 combat. You should watch out for Conduit, things like that. There's other cases as well. How the elites upgrade, when they start being upgraded, so on and so forth. So I think that kind of covers, you know, that's more or less a summary of everything here. Obviously everything in this video has a marker in the YouTube page, so you can click on that timestamp and that'll take you to the appropriate section that you care about. So if you're not a new player and you're just a pro trying to get the elite strategies, you can skip past all of kind of the exposition where I explain stuff and jump right to the thresholds that matter, and that's fine. The last thing I'll say here, to kind of wrap things up is, as always, if there's an elusive topic you'd like me to talk about in a future guide or something, let me know in a comment. I have a lot of experience with this game. I'm a private beta tester, so I have a lot of kind of niche information that may or may not be captured on the wiki pages. I help out and I answer those questions when they come up, but I'm not updating the wiki a ton myself. So there might be things missing or wrong or whatever. I can come up with pretty good guides that I think will be helpful here. So, let me know in a comment what you want to see coming next. Otherwise, I have a couple things planned anyway, just for that. Thanks a lot for watching. As always, I really value your time, and stay tuned for what's next, folks. Take care.